Now we're on Daf Tesvav Amud Beis. Umina Tamer Damrina Ki Haigavna. What is Rav Huna's premise that we can operate in halacha with the mechanism called tliya? Tisnan, the source for tliya is a Mishnah, believe it or not, in Shvius. Now, in Shvius, we're enjoined from working the animals in the field. The animals will not do work in the field, and the field will lie fallow. Kili kol haaretz, God owns the land. And we have here machlokas in the Mishnah between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel, and Beit Shammai are machmir, as they usually are, and Beis Hillel are making. Beit Shammai omrim lo yimkar adam parach or reshes b'shvius. A person should not sell a cow that is suitable for plowing a field on Shvius. Now let's assume he is selling this cow to another Jew, and Beit Shammai are worried about the possibility that that Jew is not careful and is not integrated into his lifestyle the prohibition of working an animal on Shvius. So Beit Shammai therefore are afraid that if you sell this animal to a Jew and you have pretty, how shall I say, pretty strong indications that the animal is going to be worked by the Jew on Shvius, which is not permissible, then you are basically violating Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Michshol. You're putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person, meaning you're, in a sense, setting up the violation, the criminal violation of the laws of Shvius. Beis Hillel Matir. Beis Hillel are going to apply the principle of Tliya. And they're going to assume, even if it's not, shall I say, a probable assumption, but it is a possible assumption, that the Jewish buyer who buys the cow, and this cow could be a threshing cow, which would be a violation of Shvius, but name, what is the buyer going to do with this? Not because he's a tzaddik, but rather Yochel L'Shokta, he's going to slaughter it. He wants the meat. Is there any indication, one way or the other, what's the purpose of the buyers buying this cow? No. But we can apply, says Beis Hillel, the principle of Tliya, and we're going to permit the animal to be sold to this other Jew under the assumption that, you know what, let's be lenient and assume Tliya that he, the Jew, will not use the animal as a work animal to thresh his field, but rather he's going to shech the animal for its meat. So Rav Huna is apparently standing on the shoulders of Beis Hillel. To the same extent, Beis Hillel applies the principle, the klal of Tliya, to be makil in selling an animal to a Jew during Shvius. So to Rav Huna is going to apply that kula, that mechanism of Tliya, to allow you to sell a large animal to a guy. And the assumption is the guy is not going to work the animal on Shabbos, but rather he is going to slaughter the animal and eat it for its meat. Omar Rabba Midami. Rav Abba says this analogy is not an accurate or fair analogy. Hassam, over there, if you're talking about the case of Shvius, is ein other mitzvah al Shvius b'hem to the Shvius. Nowhere does the Torah say that you have to guarantee that your animal is not going to work on Shvius. There's no such isur. No obligation to rest one's animal, and therefore I understand why Beis Hillel are more makil in that case. But in the case of selling your animal to a guy, hacha, that's our case, is other mitzvah shisus behem to b'Shabbos. You're required to see to it that the animal rests on Shabbos. And if you rent it out to a guy on Shabbos, and the guy is going to, for Shabbos, but the guy is going to work the animal on Shabbos, then you're not allowed to do such a thing, because now your animal is working on Shabbos. Gemara is still not happy. The Gemara now is going to prove that even in a case where there's no shvisas hachefetz, which we could talk about kelim, nevertheless we're going to be machmir. Okay, so the Gemara is now going on a two-pronged attack. One is Abaye and the other is Ravashi. In a certain sense, I would rather start with Ravashi. I think it's a little easier, but we have to go through the daf. So for some reason, Ravina Ravashi, where they organized the daf Gemara, they put Abaye first and Ravashi second. So what's the difference here between the attack of Abaye and the attack of Ravashi? They're minakotza lakotza, two different extremes. Abaye is going to attack the assumption that because your mitzvah in the shvisas behemto, like in the case of Shabbos, therefore we have to be machmir, and the Gemara's argument against Rav Huna is we're not going to allow you to sell the animal to a goy, because if we allow you, you'll be renting the animal to the goy, and your mitzvah b'shvisas behemto. V'arei sodeh. Now we'll go back to Shvius. In the case of Shvius, we said that you're not mitzvah b'shvisas behemto. You don't have to guarantee that the animal does not work and takes it easy on Shvius. But what about the field itself? The field itself, you own the field, you're a Jew. You're not allowed to work the field during Shvius. The year of Shvius has to guarantee that the animal, that the sod of the field is left fallow without working. And on the mitzuval shvisas sadeo b'shvius, you're obligated to see to it that your field will rest on shvius, meaning it won't be subject to any malach. And nevertheless, Visanya, I think the Brisa should be read Visanya. Beit Shammai Omrim lo yimkar adam, stay near b'shvius u'beisil matir mipnei sheyachal alvira. You're assuming, says Abaye, in your attack against Rav Huna, that we're not going to apply the principle of tliya to be mekil in a case where you're mitzvah al shvisas behemto. Well, what about the case of Shvius? And Beis Hillel, we pass like Beis Hillel against Beit Shammai, is going to be mekil and apply the principle of tliya to allow you to sell your field during Shvius. Now, presumably, you're selling your field during Shvius to a Jew, and you have every reason to believe that this Jew that you're selling it to has no kpeda. He's not careful about the laws of Shvius. That means that he's going to buy your animal, and he's going to work it during Shvius. And we always say that if we allow you to sell it to the person, then you're going to go ahead and rent it to the person. So how could you go ahead and entertain the possibility that you're going to rent out your field to another Jew on Shvius, and he's not a Shvius observant Jew. He's going to work the field on Shvius. And therefore Beit Shammai prohibits it. Lo yimkar adam, stay near b'shvius, even though it's a stay near, which means that they dug up holes in the field so that they'll leave the field fallow for the following year, and the waters will fall down and get seeped up into the holes. Beit Shammai nevertheless amatir neshiyachal ovira. Beit Shammai are assuming that, you know what? Despite the fact that you left the field near, this Jew that's buying your field, he's going to get its maximum out of the field, and therefore to maximize and exploit the field to its maximum, he's going to work the field. And therefore you are violating lifnei ivur lo sitein mikshal. Or if we have gzeira atu schirus, then it will be a violation of shvius on the part of its owner. And Beis Hillel mekil. Why Beis Hillel mekil? The answer is because he sold him a stay near, right? The holes were dug up into the field, and we're going to assume, which is tliya, that even though Yom Mitzvah Shvisas Sadeu B'Shvius, nevertheless the buyer is gonna use the field for near, meaning he's gonna allow the land, the field, to lie fallow for that year of Shvius, not because he's a Shvius observant Jew, but simply because it helps and enhances the productivity of the field. So in any event, what Abaye is attacking, and we're going to now get to Ravashi, is why are you so machmir because of Shvisas Behemto? We don't find that in Shvisas Sadeu Beis Hillel is machmir. Maskif lo Ravashi. Ravashi is going to object on the other level. V'chiechi deid adam mitzuvah shari. you're going to say that you could be makil in the case of a behemoth during Shvius and allow you to sell the animal to another Jew who's not going to observe Shvius, because we're going to assume that the buyer is going to shech the animal for a kalim. What about the case of kalim? Ain't on the mitzvah Shvius kalim Shvius. Just like we said, you're not mitzvah shvius behemto b'shvius, you're not mitzvah shvius kela b'shvius. There's no prohibition against the kalim working on your behalf. Today, by the way, it could be very relevant with robots. In any event, utran, and yet we have a Mishnah that says, in Maseches shvius, that elu hein kalim shein adam rashal b'ochem b'shvius. We're not going to allow you to sell certain utensils that are designated for malacha, and you can't sell them on Shvius, even though ain't other mitzvah v'shvius kalim. For example, here's the list: hamachresha, a plow. V'chol keleh, there are various parts of a machresha, of a plow, that could be detached and used on its own, on their own, to plow the field. Ha'ol. Right, ol is a yoke that you put on the animal. Like usually they take two animals at a time, put a yoke on both of them. V'mizre v'deker. Okay, mizre apparently is a kind of a hoe, but it's not exactly the same as a decker, which is a classic hoe. It's a shovel, but you could use it as a hoe. Apparently, it has sharp points to it. And you can put it in the ground, and you can prepare. You can plow the field. So all these kalim that are used for things that are not allowed on shvius, you're not allowed to sell. Why? Because you're selling it to a Jew. That Jew is mitzvah shvius kalim, and you're over lifnei l'sitei mechsha by selling him these kalim that are exclusively dedicated for the purpose of malacha, of doing malachas that are prohibited on shvius. So you see, says Rav Ashi, that we're not going to be makil in a case of eno the mitzvah shvisas kalim, but rather we're going to accept this opinion that you're not allowed to sell it. So how did you defend Rav Huna, who allowed selling livestock to a guy, by saying, you know what, we're going to apply the principle of Tliya? You see that we don't apply the principle of Tliya, even if ain't the mitzvah. So you were applying the principle of Tliya in the case of para, and you're going to be told that he's going to shech the para and he's not going to work the animal on shvius. And why? Because ain't other mitzvah al shvius b'amto b'shvius. What about kalim? Ain't other mitzvah shvius kalim b'shvius, and yet we're not going to allow you to sell these kalim that are muadim and are designated for work, because we're going to assume that you're giving a michshol and you're stumbling the buyer, and he's going to use these kalim to violate shvius. Elamar Ravashi kol heicha de ikol misla talinan afagav de mitzuva kol heicha de lekol misla talinan lo talinan afagav deina mitzu. Says Ravashi, the conclusion of all this discussion is that whether you apply the principle of Tliya or you did not allow applying the principle of Tliya does not depend on whether or not you're mitzvah al shvisas X, whatever that X is. No. That's not even a factor to be considered. What we're going to consider is whether or not this assumption of Tliya, every Tliya is based on an assumption, is a viable assumption. Meaning, do you have a basis for assuming X? And then maybe we'll be lenient. If we don't have an assumption, a pressing reason to assume X, then we're going to have to be machmir, and we can't use Tliya. So, for example, in the case of those tools that are designated exclusively for use in, different kinds of farming, malachos, then there's a definite logical reason to assume that's what the buyer is going to do with those kalim. And therefore, we can't apply the principle of Tliya. Hence, you're not allowed to sell them the kalim. Now, what about selling a cow? There, apparently, it's reasonable to assume that the buyer is purchasing the cow for slaughter, for its meat. In a case of a stay near, Beis Hill says it's reasonable to assume that even though the buyer is suspected of violating the laws of Shvius, nevertheless, he'll allow it to lie fallow for that year because it's already been prepared with the holes in the ground and it's very healthy for the field. And next year, the year after Shvius, he'll be able to exploit the field to its max. Rabbi Zovinahu Chamer Rabin sold a donkey. Now, wait a minute. We don't allow you to sell a donkey, which is a large animal, to a guy. And now you're selling it to a Jew, and we know that the Jew is going to sell it to a guy. So at the end of the day, you got the same problem. Abaye says to Rabba, oh, I'm sorry. So again, let's go over it one more time. Rabba went ahead and he sold this donkey. And who did he sell it to? To Yisrael, who was selling donkeys. So, he was a donkey seller. And he buys your donkey, and Rabba sells him your donkey. And Rabba knows that he is going to sell to a guy. Amalei Abai objects. Rabba, why'd you do such a thing? My time of it, Marhoch. You're going to set it up now that the sale of this donkey is going to end up with the guy obtaining possession over the donkey. So Rabbi embarrassingly tried to defend himself, and he says, "I know Yisrael is avidi. I didn't sell it to the guy. I sell it to Yisrael. If the Yisrael decides to sell it to a guy, that's his problem. It's not mine." By response to Rabbi, you should have taken into consideration up front that this Jew, who is a donkey seller by profession, is going to sell it to a guy. Why'd you sell it to the Jew? Right? Oh, again, I'm sorry. Now, so Rabbi says to Abaye, I sold it to a guy. Just 1 second. Oh, the Israel lo kol masbin. You have to read it with a question mark. Sorry. Why do I assume that the Israel is going to sell it to a guy? Maybe the Israel will sell it to another Jew. And this again seems to be based on tliya, but it's a reasonable tliya. Mar says no. We're not convinced that Rav is correct. Esvei. We learned in a brayso makom shenogu limkar be'imedakal kusim mochrin. Okay, now we get into the sugi of kusim, which is a complicated sugi. We don't know exactly the status of the kusi, whether he's a Jew, he's not a Jew, did he convert? Was it a valid conversion or not? Anyway, so this was totally in minhag. There were different minhag about how to treat the kusim. I guess the kusim were different in different places. So therefore, there's a place where the minhag is that we allow selling heavy-duty livestock to the kusim. Apparently, the kusim are not considered like the akal. Is mochrin, and the Brisa says we could rely in those places on that leniency. Shalom limkar. In other places, they don't allow that leniency. Is ein mochrin. Don't sell heavy-duty livestock to the kusim in that area where the machmir not to allow, their custom is not to allow that sale. My time. Smart says, what is the underlying logic that compels those who are strict in that custom and they don't allow selling livestock to the kusim? I'm going to prove to you that the kusim, with all due respect, even though they're not the hutim, but the kusim, they are not suspect of bestiality. We have We have to worry about bestiality with regard to akum, not kusa, but akum, and you're not allowed to set up your animals in a way that they might find your animals and do it after they do with the animals. Schar meitzel scharim, the kavos eats in the kavos. Just 1 second. I forgot exactly. Ah, so this part, we're talking about human beings. We're not talking about animals. So I guess here we're worried about. I'm not sure if it's seduction or rape. I don't know exactly. It's not clear to me now. But in any event, here we're afraid of sexual violations. All right, we're going to have a whole sugi about this later on in Daf Chaf Beis, so we don't have to get distracted with it now. The Ein Tzarech Lomer, the Kavis hates the Schar hates the Kavis. If you're going to set up, a Jewish woman, next to a guy, a male guy, then for sure you have to be worried about sexual violation. Anyway, the Ein Mosrim Behemel Roa Shalahem, right? We don't entrust an animal with non-Jewish idol worshipping shepherds. The Ein Misyachdim Imohem, and if you are alone in a closed area with a guy, he might kill you. The Ein Mosrim Lem Tinok, Lalando Sefer. Sefer here means, some sort of a secular, professional uh, piece of knowledge. So you can't let a child be alone with him because, he might do something terrible with the child. Lalando Umdus, even though he's only teaching him secular knowledge, but you never know. He might even decide to teach him idol worship. But now, according to the second price, until now, we've been talking about Akum, and they were afraid of immorality and bestiality and teaching him idol worship and so forth and so on, and maybe murdering him, who knows what. But when it comes to the Kusim, then you're allowed to set up your animal in a pundak. Pundak is where there might be a yichud, there might be privacy in an inn with kusim. Zechar mates on the kavis and the kavis eats zechar. If you ain't tzarich loma, how much more so zechar mates zechar in the kavis eats the kavis, which is only a chash of bestiality. Most of behemel roa shalem, you're allowed to entrust an animal with the shepherds of the kusim. Misyachdim imoim, and you're allowed to be alone with a kusi. And we're not afraid he's going to kill you or rape you or whatever have you. Most of them, Tino, and you're allowed to hire a kusi to teach your son an umnus. And we're not afraid that he might do something bestial with the child, or, he might teach him apikourses. Alma, what do we see from this? Lo chashidi. We see that we're not we don't suspect kusim of bestiality. Now, the first brisa says that the minhag hamakom, the local custom, will determine whether or not you're allowed to sell small livestock to kusim, right? And we said that there were two minhagim. Some did not allow it, right? Mokum shenogu limkar behema daka, a small animal lekusim is then mochrin, you're allowed to. Shalom limkar, those who follow the custom not to sell small livestock to kusi is ein mochrin. In those places, we're not allowed to sell it. But Alma loch shidi. Right. One thing is clear that the brisa in the second brisa says that we're not choshish for bestiality with regard to a kusa. So when the first brisa says that you're allowed to sell small livestock, whether or not you're allowed to sell small livestock to a kusi depends upon the local minhag. That's only with regard to small livestock. But with regard to large livestock, it seems clear that that all the minhagim would agree, and it's universally accepted that we have to be machmir. and we have to prohibit the selling of a large livestock to the kusim. And why? And if the kusim are not choshed on bestiality and so forth and so on, so what's the problem in selling large livestock to a kusi? The only answer is that once you sell to the kusi, he's going to sell it on to pass it on to a guy, and that's against Rav Huna. I'm sorry, Rabbah. We finished with Rav Huna. Rabbah. Well, Rabbah said, I don't care if he passes it on to a guy. The Ode, and furthermore, I have another reason why I object to Rabbah. This Sanya we learned in the Brisa, Ein Mochrim Lem Lo Zayin V'Lo Klei Zayin. We can't sell them weapons because they're going to use that maybe to kill Jews or armaments to protect them out in war. V'Ein Mashchizim Lem Es Zayin. And let's say they come to you to hire you to fix up their armament. You're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to sell either socks for their feet or these collars that they put around the prisoners. He calls it brands or chains of iron that would be clamped around the neck. It's also a kind of a weapon. You go to museums and see these kinds of prison collars, from yesteryear. Below kavolim are the, like the handcuffs. Below shalshalos shel barzel, chains of iron. He says here that the purpose is to prevent the idolaters from doing damage to Jews. Well, the Ritva adds that if they murder Jews, they violate the prohibition of murder, and therefore you put a stumbling block. Okay, it's not even. And we don't differentiate about selling weapons, whether it's to an idol worshiper or to a kusi, my timer. If you're going to say the kusim are going to kill us, we said in the vice that we had before that you're allowed to be alone in a closed room with a kusi. We're not afraid he's going to knock your block off. Ella, but rather we're going to say that Brisa prohibits selling weapons to a kusi. We're afraid that the kusi, he's got constant connections with the goyim, and the weapons he sells to the kusi will ultimately land up in the hands of the idolaters. And that's again a kash on Rabbah. Right? Rabbah said, I can sell a donkey to a Jewish purchaser, knowing full well that he might sell it and probably will sell it to a guy. Now we have a refutation of Rabbah, and maybe now we could refute that refutation by saying Kusi lo avid tshuva, Yisrael avid tshuva. In other words, we're not going to give the Kusi the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, he's going to do tshuva and he's not going to sell it to a guy. But in the case of Yisrael, even if right now he's not a very seriously observant Jew, but maybe he'll do tshuva. So we have a statement from Nachman. We're not going to rely on the possibility that the Yisrael who's buying your livestock is going to do tshuva, but rather we're choshed that we suspect that he's going to go ahead and sell it to an idol worshiper. And therefore, we're not going to make any distinction whether or not he's a kusi or he's a Jew that's suspect. In all cases, we're enjoined from selling it. And at this point, Rabbah raises his hands in the air and he says, you've defeated me. I realized I made a big mistake by selling my livestock to Yisrael, who might sell it, pass it on, probably will pass it on to a guy. And therefore, Roy Basrei Tlasim Parse, he ran after the Jew who bought who purchased his livestock for 3 parsos, which is along the Ikadam according to another parsa. He went through one parsa, but through the sand. And he unfortunately he couldn't catch up to him on time to revoke the sale. Just like you're not allowed to sell weapons to a guy because he's going to use them to kill Jews, so too you're not allowed to sell to listim Yisrael to Jewish robbers because they too, if they're listim Mizuyan, they want to buy these weapons in order to kill people. If you're telling me that this is a listim who kills people, is then pshita. I don't have to tell you. He has the same status as an Ovid Kochav. If you can't sell weapons to Ovid Kochav, you certainly can't sell to a well-known, wanted, dead or alive Yisrael listim. The idol katil, and if he's not suspect of killing, is a Milo. Why can't you sell weapons to him? The Olam Dilo Kotil, he's not suspect of killing, but Hachi, Mayaskina bimash mashmota, the Zimni, the Ovid Latsule Nafshe. In other words, even if the listim is not suspect to killing, he may at the end of the day kill someone if he has to, because they're going to try to protect their mama when he attacks them, try to steal from him, and then he'll take out these weapons and he'll knock your block off. When he is pursued, this thief, and overtaken, he will fight to save himself. And if you sell him weapons, then you're going to cause the owner to lose his property. Oh, I thought. Anyway, prohibit the sale of weapons to this type of thief to deprive him of a means of defense. Okay. I thought to deprive him of a means of offense. We don't sell to the goyim shields, right, which would strengthen their ability in a military thing. The Esho Remochim Lem Chisim others allowed. My time, why is always saying that you're not allowed to sell Trisim, if it's to the idols, the idolatries will use this to protect themselves. Maybe we should have a blanket prohibition. We don't sell food to a guy, because if we sell food to a guy, he's going to eat the food, and that'll come and attack us. Omar Rav, and here we're going to end it for today on the top of Daf Tezayin. It's impossible to say that we won't sell wheat and barley to an idol worship, because that's going to cause Ava. They're going to come and kill us. Is Hachinami here too? We should not sell even those items to them so as to avoid giving them sustenance, but it's impossible to do so. So with regard to shields, apparently it's possible to abstain from selling shields. The idolaters will not be provoked for Ava and hostility, and therefore we can get away with it. But we can't get away with it if we don't sell them wheat and barley. Okay, then this is where we'll stop for today. Tomorrow, I think if we're back to 9:30, that should be good. And if it can't work out, let me know.